So welcome to our Palm Sunday evening service on Thomas Merton and jazz. This is a tradition that we started 4 years ago with Jerry Tykerob, Quintessential Jazz, Jerry's sister Lynn Szabo, and those of us at Brentwood. We weren't able to do it last year, but this year we decided that we would give it a shot online. This is a fairly informal online process. So we hope that you will put up with whatever glitches we may encounter, but that the service itself, the themes and the poems and the questions and the ponderings will be a blessing to you as we enter into Holy Week. And we do recall the laments that Jesus experienced in entering Jerusalem on that first Palm Sunday to disrupt its power structures and expectations. We find much of that in Thomas Merton's poetry, powerful poetry in a variety of ways. And it will be accompanied this evening, as it always is on our Palm Sunday evenings, by his favorite music, jazz. And the music this evening is going to be from Jerry Tykerob's group, Quintessential Jazz, some of their original compositions. We do acknowledge with respect and gratitude that the Brentwood building sits on the traditional and unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, with whom we see ourselves as kin in the care of the Creator's gifts to us. And so in the midst of our sorrow over all of our misrepresentations of Jesus, that phrase comes from a confession that the Presbyterians made to Indigenous peoples in 1994. We find a provocative joy in being reconciled with all of our relations. And we give thanks to Melanie Gleason-Lyle, who we met when the Marcus Mosley Chorale, with whom she sings, we're practicing and rehearsing at Brentwood. So we are grateful for her permission to use this wonderful image in our land acknowledgement. I think most of you know Merton. Many of you know Merton much better than I do, but he is one of the most widely read devotional writers of the last century. And in the midst of graduate studies and teaching in English, he entered the Trappist Abbey of Gethsemane near Louisville, Kentucky. And shaped by their disciplines, he wrote eloquently about spirituality and social justice. And of particular interest to us, he loved jazz. So say a little bit about who's going to guide us through this evening. Jerry Tykerob, who you can see, I think, on the screen. Jerry is Christian Missionary and Alliance minister. He and I connected, 10 years ago, at least, through jazz. He's now retired, but that doesn't mean that he's inactive at all. And he started, I think you were the founder of, or one of the founders of, this wonderful jazz combo called Quintessential Jazz. And so we'll be featuring their music tonight, and Jerry will say a little bit more about that when we take you through the themes and poems and jazz and questions. My name is Brian Fraser. I have the privilege of ministering with the congregation of Brentwood Presbyterian Church. I have been a jazz fan since I got to Toronto in 1965 to begin studying Canadian history. And part of the ritual at the residence at Knox College was that once you had dumped your bags, you went down to Yonge Street to Sam the Record Man's. And you found records on sale that you would take back to your room in your little Sea Breeze record player. And the first album I bought in Toronto at Sam's was Oscar Peterson's Canadiana Suite. So that got me hooked on jazz. Lynn Szabo isn't able to be with us this evening, but she's an integral part of this whole enterprise of our Palm Sunday services. She's certainly been advising us on our choice of the poems, and she was the one who edited the collection of Merton's poems that we are working from. I also want to make mention of this icon that we're using this evening on this slide. Andre Prévost, who taught high school in North Van for a number of years, now lives over on Vancouver Island in retirement, but he painted this wonderful icon and has given us permission to use it in our Merton services. And you can see his website there. It's worth going to and checking out. So Jerry, I'm going to turn it over to you. What we thought we would do is use the slides, the PowerPoint slides at the beginning as an introduction, and then we'll close the share and it'll be just Jerry and I working through this, but we thought we'd give you an outline of the flow.
Margaret, watch it someplace else, please.
Thanks, Brian. When Brian and I were talking about this evening, we started reflecting on some of the themes of Lent that overlap very much with the themes we have all been living with through the COVID pandemic. And we saw a lot of overlap. In fact, living with the restrictions of the pandemic has been in some ways like a long season of Lent. And so we identified some themes that we wanted to explore with a poem that reflects that theme and a little bit of music and also a question to ponder around 6 different themes. The first being loneliness and isolation. And we'll introduce the poem and the title of the song so as we go through each one. The second theme is about listening. And the third theme is hope in despair. The next theme is one that I think has tried many of us, especially those of us who are extroverts and want to get out there. It's called waiting. Another theme is very much what Lent is all about, anticipation. And the last theme is very much also about the Easter season, and that is redemptive joy. And we have selected a poem for each one of these themes and some music and a little discussion around some questions that hopefully will provoke some good thinking and reflection tonight as we go through the process.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. We're going to leave the chat box up throughout the whole evening. And so if there are any ideas that you have, one of the things that we try and cultivate around Brentwood is kind of dialogical discernment, conversations. And so it's, we use the chat box in these Zoom services to encourage that. So if you've got any ideas at all, any questions that you want to contribute to the conversation, just throw them into the chat box and we'll be able to see them. To connect a bit more, this is a tradition around Brentwood that we call the KISS principle. It's called shameless self-promotion. So if you want to get any more of the music that Quintessential Jazz has generated, and I think it's what, 4 CDs now, Jerry?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's their website. They're all available there. Lynn has a website, just lynnzabo.com. You can get the Merton poetry at that website. And if you want to find out a little bit more about Brentwood, brentwoodpcc.com. Again, thank you for being with us this evening. It means a lot to us. We will record it. We will post it on the Brentwood Presbyterian Church in Canada website and on our Jazz Evensong at Brentwood website. But I ran across this wonderful quote from an article that Diane April wrote in Bellarmine, which is the magazine for Bellarmine University, back in 2007. And she said, it's fitting that jazz was Merton's music of choice. The soul of jazz is improvisation, the art of listening and responding in the moment, of creating connections on the spot. So in many ways, that's what we see this evening being. Listening and responding in the moment, improvising around these wonderful poems, and making these wonderful connections on the spot. So again, thank you so much for being with us. Now, I think Dan's going to work his wonders, and with a bit of luck, all you'll see is Jerry and I. There's Jerry. Ah, there we are. Oh, and Jill, of course, my wife, Jill. Oh, that's great. Well, the first theme that we're looking at is from In Loneliness and Isolation. And this is a poem that Merton wrote for M. This was the nurse with whom he fell in love. And this is for M in October. If you and I could meet up there in that cool cloud, like two sunbeams or birds going straight to South America, or distracted spirits flying together innocent in midair. Or if we could be together like two barges in a string, or tight wandering rafts heading down river to St. Louis or to New Orleans. If we could come together like two parts of one love song, two chords going hand in hand, a perfect arrangement to be two parts of the same secret. Or if we could recover and tell again our midsummer secret. If you and I could ever start again as strangers here in this forsaken field where the crickets rise up around my feet like spray out of a green ocean. But I am alone. Alone, walking up and down, leaning on the silly wind and talking out loud like a madman. If only you and I were possible. Never mind. Tonight the moon is full, and you over buildings, I over trees. We will watch it rise together. And the music we're hearing is a piece by Tyler Friesen called Far Away.
So, Brian, that's a very wistful poem, which I think captures some of the feelings that we all have about loneliness and isolation. And I'm wondering, what have you discovered? How have you discovered God working in these times of loneliness and isolation in your own life and in the lives of others that you interact with?
Yeah, let me talk about my own situation first, and then say just a little bit about others. On March the 26th, I started something that I haven't done before in my life, which is a daily discipline of prayer. And so I write a prayer every morning, and then take what's usually the last line and ponder, meditate on it for, well, you know me well enough to know that 15, 20 minutes is a lifetime for me. That's, but I've developed that discipline. And so it's that, for me anyway, it's what's broken through that loneliness and the weariness that comes from that loneliness is that new connection with God. And I see God very much as the Trinity. And so I find myself addressing God most days as dear family. And so it's that sense of being in community, in connection with all of God's kin. And the other part of it, especially around the church, is Ben McCrae, who's one of the jazz musicians who works with us at Brentwood. Ben started talking about our expanding reach into our e-neighborhoods. And so it's not the same as face-to-face, but it's a different way of being in touch with people, of being in conversation with people, dialogically discerning the best ways for us to respond to this situation. So it's improvising in new situations where a lot that we are used to is unraveling. But rather than despair over that, we find hope and hospitality in reaching out in new ways.
Well, I've wrestled personally with loneliness and isolation a lot because I'm an extrovert by nature and I get energy from being with people. I love variety. I love getting out, and so this has been a season of learning how to make times of being alone or times being away from others meaningful, and learning how to practice other things to fill my life with things that are meaningful and helpful. I've learned there's a difference between isolation and loneliness.
Yeah,
Just because I'm
great
isolated doesn't
distinction.
mean I have to be alone.
Yeah.
And there are ways to interconnect with people through technology and telephone and, going for walks and keeping your distance, that kind of thing. And so I've just found it to be a good time for me to grow in my own skin and maybe explore some parts of my personality that could go deeper without other people around.
Yeah.
It's maybe like a more balanced diet. And,
Good way of putting it.
Relationships are like the French fries of life for me. So it's been a bit more of a balanced diet, and that's been a good thing. I've also tried to reach out to people who I thought might be feeling lonely and isolated with even just texts or a phone call or some form of communication to let them know they are not forgotten. I found that that's been a meaningful thing to do to get me off of myself. So God is at work, and we're truly never alone in him. He's always with us, never leave us or forsake us. So exploring the presence of God in my life has been part of the growing experience for me.
And that was such a profound understanding that Merton had. Yeah,
for sure.
Thank you. That was great. And again, let me encourage any of you that have comments or suggestions to make, just type them into the chat box so that that we can see them.
Okay, well, let's look at another theme here, which I think actually kind of goes along with loneliness and isolation, or can go along with it, and that's listening and developing things that happen to us when we're in silence. And so this poem from Thomas Merton is called "In Silence," and the background music, I hope we're getting the levels about right. The song is "End of Summer," and it's written by Phyllis Hepner. So we'll just listen to a little bit of that. Is it there?
Yeah.
And this particular poem definitely causes us to ponder the discipline of listening. In silence, be still. Listen to the stones of the wall. Be silent. They try to speak your name. Listen to the living walls. Who are you? Who are you? Whose silence are you? Who, be quiet, are you? as these stones are quiet. Do not think of what you are, still less of what you may be one day. Rather, be what you are. But who? Be the unthinkable one you do not know. Oh, be still while you are still alive, and all things live around you. Speaking, I do not hear, to your own being. Speaking by the unknown that is in you and in themselves. I will try, like them, to be my own silence. And this is difficult. The whole world is secretly on fire. The stones burn, even the stones, they burn me. How can a man be still or listen to all things burning? How can he dare to sit with them when all their silence is on fire?
So in the disruptions of our lives, Jerry, that are going on, familiar voices are being silenced. We don't hear them as often or in the same way as we did before, and new voices are being heard. What's your sense of where we hear the voice of God in all of this, suggesting new ways of being together?
Well, I think in my own journey over these past months of COVID and probably a little more focused during the season of Lent, I've been asking God to help me hear his voice in new ways or unexpected ways, in ways that I normally don't hear his voice. And in particular, through inner thoughts that come to me where I say, where did that come from? How did that thought cross my mind? That thought hasn't crossed my mind in a long time or never before. It's what I call a peculiar thought. It's a thought that either raises a question or wants me to do some research and reading, or it changes my perspective on how I feel or look at the world. And so I've been asking God that in the silence and in the more relational space in my life, to help me to be much more attentive to things that may come into my mind, or that somebody else might say to me. I have a mentor who has a great quote. He says, Jerry, for your information, let me ask you a question. And it's a question that is designed to provoke contemplation and thought. Ruth and I will go for a walk every morning, unless the weather is really untoward. And we often find ourselves as well more in touch with the natural settings around us. Fortunately, we have a lovely place to go for a walk where there's birds and trees, and we have a beautiful view of Mount Baker and sun. And we often find that we sense God's presence or his voice drawing us to himself through those experiences. So I think it's more or less what Merton is trying to say is try to listen where you don't think there might be something that there's something to listen to, only to discover there really is.
It really is.
What about you?
Well, to pick up on a couple of those things, I think that one of the senses that I get from Merton is that he had this realization that God was in everything and God was speaking to us in everything. And I mean, that just, for me anyway, comes through the poem so powerfully. And the piece that I'll read next, The Vine, is a poem where him listening to God in the rhythms of nature comes through so powerfully. But I'm in many ways the same as you. I find myself listening to different people in this time of COVID and in these new relationships. I can get tired and weary of Zoom, but it's put me in touch with more people than I would have been if we were trying to meet face to face. And it's a different kind of listening. And I'm finding it a revealing kind of listening. I'm finding new phrases, as you say, kind of new ways of looking at things. But what I've noticed particularly is the way in which other people use phrases that I haven't picked up before. And so I'm paying more and more attention to that. And the other thing is, as you and I've talked about often, we live in a world that is dominated by contention. In other words, you have to believe what I believe, or by criticism. You're wrong because you don't believe what I believe. And both of those modes of conversation push people away and break relationships. What you were talking about, just being curious, is what invites people into a relationship. And so I find myself paying more and more attention to the kinds of questions that I ask that invite people into an alliance in blessing or caring for God's creation. And again, I think that thread of caring for God's creation in all of its dimensions is so deeply rooted in Merton. So our next theme is hope in despair. The poem is a poem called The Vine. And as we mentioned, it picks up on Merton's wonderful sensitivity to the dynamics of and presence of God in the natural world. The song we're going to hear is Sunny Breeze. And I think this was another one of Phyllis's, wasn't it, Jerry? Yeah, Phyllis Hepner's. When wind and winter turn our vineyard into a bitter Calvary, when hands come out and crucify us like the innocent vine, how long will starlight be as sharp as thorns in the night of our desolate life? How long will moonlight fear to free the naked prisoner? Is there no delivery? The mob of winds on Holy Thursday come like murderers and batter the wall of our locked and terrified souls. Our doors are down, our defense is done. Good Friday's reigns in Roman order march with sharpest lances up our vineyard hill. More dreadful than St. Peter's cry when he was being swallowed in the sea, cries out our anguish, oh, we are abandoned. When in our life we see the ruined vine cut open by the cruel spring, plowed by the furious season. As if we had forgotten how the whips of winter and the cross in April would all be lost in one bright miracle. For look, the vine on Calvary is bright with branches. See how the leaves laugh in the light and how the whole hill smiles with flowers. And know how all our numbered veins must run with life, like the sweet wine when it is full of sun.
So a good question that I think comes out of this poem and good for us to reflect on is, where's God guiding us to find hope in these times of great despair?
Hmm. Yeah, this is, we've been, since we kind of came up with these questions, I've been pondering this a lot. And part of me wants to say, literally, wherever you look. But it depends on how you look. Are you looking for the problems, for the traumas, for the tragedies? Jerry, I think you know that a number of the jazz musicians that hang around Brentwood are working in a variety of ways on the music of Fred Rogers. So we have a big band, Ben McCrae directs it, called the Brentwood Jazz All-Stars, and they've commissioned Jill Townsend, who's one of Canada's best big band leaders and composers and arrangers and teachers, to do a series of 8 Mr. Rogers Neighborhood songs for the big band. And so just when we shut down for COVID, they were beginning to practice that. So instead of an April premiere, it'll probably be sometime, well, it may even be on into 2022, because you don't want to bring together a bunch of horn players until the pandemic is definitely under control. But Rogers has this wonderful quote that shows up in all sorts of places. He talked to his mother about tragedies and traumas and disasters and all of that sort of stuff, and where was God in the midst of it? And his mother's answers was, look for the helpers. Who's showing up to care for people in the midst of these tragedies? And I think of the literally millions upon millions upon millions of people who in the midst of the pandemic have been the frontline workers and the caregivers at great risk to themselves. And so that to me is a sign of hope. I remember a couple of the jazz musicians who've come to Brentwood and actually ended up being baptized and joined the church. When I said to them, what was it that attracted them to Brentwood and kept them there? They said, well, the first thing was we felt the hospitality of God in that place. And in that hospitality, we found hope and healing. And I'm just sitting there gobsmacked. I've been teaching theology and church history and ministry and organizational development for 50 years now? And I never came up with that kind of concise witness to the gospel. God's hospitality gives you hope, and that gives you healing. And so I think in times of great despair, if we can quiet ourselves and, to go back to an earlier theme, listen, pay attention in a different way. And I think that's what this wonderful collection of poetry that Lynn's pulled together helps us do. We're going to hear God in surprising places and in surprising ways.
That's good. I keep finding encouragement from all kinds of surprising sources. Again, if I'm paying attention, I found people are open to smile and talk.
Yes. Yeah.
Or you sense it under their mask anyway.
Jill, by the way, just to jump in, Jill is a wonderful person on our walks. And just so it's the eyes, right, above the mask. And then she'll stop and chat away to them, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, we've been enjoying that too. I take great comfort out of the promise from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where the Apostle Paul writes this phrase for people of faith. I think this is a real source of hope. It says, outwardly we feel like we're wasting away, but inwardly we're being renewed day by day.
Yeah.
And there is a sense of inner renewal and hope that can come in our spiritual disciplines, our spiritual journey, that is, it's not dependent upon other circumstances or other people or anything else. It's an inner experience of the presence of God in our lives, inside of us. And I every morning I ask God to help me be aware of how He is doing renewal work in my own life, and hopefully I can transmit some of that hope to other people. That encourages me.
Nice.
Let's move on to the next theme. This might be the one that is the hardest for most of us right now. I liken the COVID journey right now with the fact that vaccines are coming out, and they we keep hearing there's a small light at the end of the tunnel. Hang in there. It feels to me like the last hour of a very long road trip, and and you don't want to stop and one more Tim Hortons
No.
anymore. You just want to get home, right? And it's kind of that, and that hour sometimes seems to take a long time. The theme is waiting. And Merton has a wonderful poem. I really resonate with this one. I've read it over a few times recently. It's called How Long We Wait. And the music to go with this one is called The Ballad of the Seas. It's written by Doug Dunbar. He wrote it because all 5 of his children's first names start with the letter C. That's where the title comes from. I'll see if I can just get it up here. Is it there? No? Hit play.
There we go.
Okay. How long we wait. How long we wait with minds as quiet as time, like sentries on a tower. How long we watch by night, like the astronomers. Heaven, when will we hear you sing, arising from our grassy hills and say, the dark day is done, and day laughs like a bridegroom in his tent, the lovely sun, his tent the sun, his tent the smiling sky. How long we wait with minds as dim as ponds, while stars swim slowly homeward in the water of our west. Heaven, when will we hear you sing? How long we listen to the silence of our vineyards and heard no bird stir in the rising barley. The stars go home behind the shaggy trees, and our minds are gray as rivers. O earth, when will you wake in the green wheat? All of our Trappist cedars sing, bright land, lift up your leafy gates. You abbey steeples, sing with bells. For look, our sun rejoices like a dancer on the rim of our hills. And in the blue west, the moon is uttered like the word farewell.
It's a great poem. I love the graze of the river. Is that the phrase in that poem?
Yeah.
So, what's your sense of where we have found the presence of God in the midst of the frustrations of waiting?
Well, I have to say that this is an area that I have struggled greatly. And the waiting for me to be able to do things that I'm used to, accustomed to doing, and not being able to has been quite challenging for me at times. I am a musician. I have a wonderful group of musicians to play with. We have not been able to play music together since last November.
Yeah.
Just rehearsing and having a musical conversation, let alone the opportunity to play for other people.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting, and I spell waiting WEIGHTING. And I have had to work very hard to say, God, I know that there's things we can learn in the waiting, that you are present in the waiting. And this is an area where I need to grow a lot more in my life, and not become impatient. I do take comfort in the fact that it says in Galatians chapter 5, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, and then this word, patience. But Brian, I have to say, I don't have good answers for this one yet. I'm still in discovery.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
Oh. No, I would echo a lot of the things that you said. I think it's probably fair to say that I have become, the piece that struck me in that poem was how important it is to let go of our drive to control. And I think if there's one thing this pandemic has shown us is that paradox of, I mean, on the one hand, we can't control this virus. I mean, we've tried everything, and even with the vaccines now, it looks as if there are variants that who knows what they're going to do. On the other hand, the speed with which we have come up with vaccines, the speed with which we have developed an incredible delivery system to get them from the lab to the manufacturer to the medical people who are giving us the shots, and all of the logistics around that. It's been quite remarkable. But I think for me, the patience has to do with reflecting on a deeper level of how we need to let go of that need to control. And it means trusting God more deeply. But it also means being loyal to the intent of God, the purpose of God, which in my faith formation really gets summarized out of Micah, which is do justice with kindness and humility. And so the frustrations of waiting for that to have an impact, to that long arc leaning in the direction of God's peace, God's shalom. But it's there. Yeah.
I guess I would say one thing that has emerged in trying to be at peace with myself and others when you talk about God's shalom is the teachings of Christ on living one day at a time and not taking too much thought about the next day, which can stir up an absence of peace, distress, and
fear and anxiety.
Ruth and I have talked a lot about let's just make today a great day and not worry about tomorrow and what we would long to do but we can't do and those things. So maybe there is something emerging and there's hope for the old boy here. But remaining peaceful. I like that idea of God's shalom for the present. That's very encouraging.
That's a great
helpful.
way of framing it.
Yeah.
So the next poem we're going to read, we think fits into this idea of anticipation. What are we anticipating? So this pushes a little bit on the edges of what we've just been talking about in terms of take it one day at a time. But I think it pushes at it in a way that's provocative. So, and the music that we're going to hear along with this is a piece written by Jerry called All for Miles. Kevin's in the service this evening, and I think this is Kevin's son, right, Jerry?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I suspect somewhere in the back of your mind, Miles Davis might have drifted in and out. But so the poem is called Spring Monastery Farm. When it is spring, when the huge bulls roam in their pens and sing like trains, when the white orchards dream in the noon and all those trees are dens of light and boom with honeybees and blue-eyed streams no longer lock their mirth among the icy shales, but run to meet the sun with faces clean. When Aries stands at the crossed elliptic with a golden cry, we'll sing the grain that dies and triumphs in the secret ground. Though in our labor and our rational Lent we bend our heads and glaze the dark earth with a shining plowshare, our minds more ardent, hearts insatiable, than all the amber bees that wrestle in the daffodils, sing in the flowers of your theology. For in the sap and music of the region's spring, we hear the picture of your voice, Creator. And in our heart's peace, answer you, and you offer the world. For all these, their spring and their necessity, but we have traded April for our ransom and our hundredfold our psalms complete these deep, uncomprehending choirs. For all these, their spring is their necessity, which by your cross and grace is made our glory and our sacrament. As every golden instant mince the Christ, keep us.
Well, Brian, I'm looking forward to hearing your wisdom to this question. You can be my advisor, my mentor here. What practices can we cultivate to nurture an urgent patience as we anticipate the coming of God's salvation, especially in Easter week?
Well, two practices come to mind, and we've touched on them in our conversations this evening. The first practice is to convene conversations. Convene conversations about what it means to be deeply human together in caring for the creation. So I wasn't aware of it when we'd chosen the poems and when Lynn helped us choose the poems, but as I've read them over and over again, that whole piece about companionship with creation and the lessons that creation teaches us have come through far more deeply for me in this reading, in this time of pondering and considering these poems. So it's convene conversations about caring for the creation. And the second practice is to do something about it. Like go act, go be a blessing in whatever way emerges for you in your circles of inspiration and influence. And by God's mercy and grace, the conversations will generate new ideas about where and how to do that. And so, surprise, surprise, it's a little bit like jazz. You start playing the melody, and then the conversation that emerges from playing the melody together throws up all of these new ideas about how to play this melody. And you listen with respect as people begin to explore it, and you connect with them and do it with them, and then they give you the space to do the same.
my heart resonates with what you're saying so much about doing something. For those of us who are doers, we get fulfillment in the doing, and it also creates anticipation in seeing some kind of outcome from that doing. I find the season of Lent, which is created to help us focus on the great event of Christ's death, resurrection, and sacrifice, and it's the culmination of a massive story. C.S. Lewis really did a great job about it when he writes about Aslan the lion and what happens to him. It's the same thing. Built into our faith journey is anticipation of yet things to come that are going to be good.
Yeah.
And I find that kind of can flow over into the rest of life, and we can anticipate even little simple things. Yesterday, Ruth made it possible for me to anticipate an angel food cake. And I enjoyed the anticipation all day. And I enjoyed the fulfillment.
I was going to say, so how was the doing?
Yeah. We went from there. So I think there is inherent in Lent a discipline for us to look forward and look ahead. And that's okay to do that, but with contentment is a balance, right? So finding things that are meaningful to us that we think are doing good for ourselves, for others, discovering them, and then taking action in even small ways mitigates as you write in your question very profoundly, the term urgent patience. I've read that over a few times and went, wow, that's urgent patience. What a turn of phrase that is. But I am grateful that we have a kind of a sense that there is more good yet to come in a life of faith, and in a life of reaching out and doing good for the creation, for our neighbor, even for our enemies. Yeah. Which is another whole level of discipline, which we don't have time to talk about tonight.
No, we don't. But maybe in one of our future services we can focus on Merton's whole peace work.
For sure.
Yeah, Jerry, thank you so much for being a companion in pulling this off. Thank you to all of you who have listened in on our conversations and contributed.
Yes, thank you.
In your ways. Lynn, blessings on you and all that you have done to make this possible. We're going to finish off. Jerry's going to read a poem called The Sowing of Meaning. And we're going to let that poem be the final word of our time together. So we'll finish off that way. But again, blessings as we enter into this Holy Week. And we trust this has been a time of blessing for all of you, as your presence has been for us.
The sowing of meanings. See high the birds. Is theirs the song that flies among the woodlight, wounding the listener with such bright arrows? Or do they play in wheeling silences, defining in the perfect sky the bounds of here below our solitude? Where spring has generated lights of green to glow in clouds upon somber branches. Ponds full of sky and stillnesses, what heavy summer songs still sleep under the tawny rushes at your brim? More than a season will be born here, nature, in your world of gravid memoirs. The quiet air awaits one note, one light, one ray, and it will be the angel spring. One flash, one glance upon the shiny pond, and then asperge, sweet wilderness, and lo, we are redeemed. For like a grain of fire smoldering in the heart of every living essence, God plants his undivided power, buries his thought, too vast for worlds, in seed and root and blade and flower. Until the amazing shadow lights of windy, cloudy April, surcharging the religious silence of the spring, creation finds the pressure of its everlasting secret too terrible to beat. Then every way we look, lo, rocks and trees, pastures and hills and streams and birds and firmament, and our own souls within us flash and shower us with light, while the wild countryside, unknown, unvisited of men, bears sheaves of clean, transforming fire. And then, oh, then the written image, schooled in sacrifice, the deep united threeness printed in our deepest being, shot by the brilliant syllable of such an intuition, turns within and plants that light far down into the heart of darkness and oblivion, and plunges after to discover flame.